We have John Shimmin and Gill Bennett with us this afternoon, and we're finding out about the company Health Checks at Home. And John, just remind us what this is all about in a nutshell.
I was invited in by Gill and Nigel to join their company. It started off as a UK company and we're now opening an Isle of Man registered company. The issue is really about, as our population ages, we have more worries about their health and well-being. I had that with my mother, and before she sadly passed away, she had a stroke and she had a fall and broke her pelvis. So it's personal to many of us that as our people are getting older, they worry about conditions of their health. When they're ill, they go and see a doctor. What we try and do is avoid them getting to the stage where they have accidents or health problems. So we use technology to monitor their well-being and their statistics, but then that is sent onto a web page that their families look at, but more importantly our clinicians look at, and they can spot trends and maybe identify early intervention to try and keep people well. All about trying to keep people at home longer and safely.
Now, you say we use technology, but actually you've brought some of this technology in. It's actually more about the person themselves taking control, isn't it? And actually using the technology themselves. Absolutely.
It's something where the technology is just a means of collecting the information for the clinicians to look at. We don't believe that technology solves the problems. We don't want to do away with the personal contact. But Gill and her people will look at the data and they'll be able to indicate the trends. But it is done in somebody's own home. It is done by the person themselves or a loved one. It could be a family member or a care worker goes in, takes the blood pressure. That's a good indication of a risk of falls or strokes. It takes their blood oximeter, so that's for people with breathing and respiratory problems, and the thermometer gives temperature. So all of that data is used by the clinicians to maybe identify if we can head off problems.
And Gill, it's your team that looks at all this information. So if somebody's using this equipment that John's just mentioned, how often do they need to be monitoring these sort of things?
Well, it will depend on the person's age and the conditions. We talked earlier on about starting maybe with blood pressure and people with worries about their blood pressure, and with COPD, which is a respiratory problem. And it depends on how well they are. It may only be once a week that we need to do that, or it may be daily. But everything will be individualised with that person, because technology is only useful if it's used by the person and they know how to use it.
And what would be great about this, I think, is that a lot of people find it a little bit scary and unsettling going into a clinical environment, even going to the doctors have their blood pressure check, and that can send it sky high without actually there being any problems. So being able to do it in your own home and keep a check on it that way is really beneficial.
You're absolutely right. There is something called white coat syndrome, and that's why when you go to the doctors, often they'll take your blood pressure 2 or 3 times to get the lowest reading. When people are doing this as a habit, it becomes part of their lifestyle, and we get more reasonable readings.
And when you say more reasonable readings, we have seen the way these applications work and how the data is collected. And I guess one of the key things is that you're building up information over a longer period of time. So presuming then you can sort of identify trends.
You're absolutely right. You go to the doctors, you have a one-off blood pressure reading done, you're started on medication, and often you go back maybe once a month for it. At home, we can see on a daily basis how those readings are panning out and what's normal for you.
So John, then how does this work with regards to liaising with your GP? Because this is presumably not something that is in place of.
No, not at all. And we're not actually saying that you must contact your GP. This is for an individual and their families. If we were to try and get all the GPs on the Isle of Man to sign up to this, we'd be here until next decade. What we're really talking about is allowing people and their families to take responsibility for the well-being. So they can, once they've taken the data, take that to the GP if they see fit. We are not instead of a GP. People will still get ill. People will still have accidents. What we're trying to do is change the thought process that the whole family can take responsibility to say, right, if we do this on a regular basis, when we're feeling well, we will be able to detect when the loved one is going off colour. And if we are doing that early enough, then we avoid the if only. And I and many other people live with the fact that if only we'd known in advance. And that's my main driver, is that many people who are quite capable of living safely and well actually end up in nursing homes too early because they've had a fall, they've been into hospital, and they never really recover from that. So we're trying to avoid those accidents before they happen.
So how easy is it then for people to sign up to this?
Well, we're launching the Isle of Man Company in August. We've got some adverts going out on the radio at the moment, so people are beginning to hear about it. We'll be at the trade show on Wednesday at the Palace, and we're trying to start pushing out the fact that we want to help people take responsibility for their own health. There are many of these devices you can buy in a chemist shop. We're not trying to compete. We would encourage people to use technology to monitor their health. What we're doing is for those people who have worries and maybe their loved ones live further away so they're not able to visit every day. And the clinicians is the main difference in this, that you can have a look on your own personal web page that can be seen by your family member and our clinicians, and that is the real difference. So in early August, we'll be pushing out more promotion. There are adverts available and there's the contact numbers on the adverts. So we will make a bit of a splash when we announce the Isle of Man Company in August, and by then we will come round and visit people in their homes. There'll be two of us asking for the person themselves and the family members to be present, and then we'll come back a week or two later and see if they do wish to take part in the service.
And just very quickly, you mentioned that if you are signed up to this, the clinicians will see it, Gill, but also your family members. What if you don't want your family to see all your health data?
That's entirely up to the patient or the client. They can't allow anybody to see that unless they choose to, and they'll have to sign for that. There's a whole raft of data protection. So we're enabling the individuals to do it. We've piloted this with domiciliary care companies, charities, third sector. We've told the government about what we're doing. And in the future, we would hope to run this out to the government for trials. But it is entirely giving the control to the individual patient. But most times that patient has loved ones who are concerned, and is to try and include them. There's nothing worse than not being able to talk to the doctor about your loved one's health because you haven't got permission to get that information. The patient should be able to give you that information, and that's what the system does.